On Friday, October 13, 1972, a Fairchild FH-227D aircraft operated by the Uruguayan Air Force set out from Montevideo, Uruguay, en route to Santiago, Chile. On board were 45 souls, mostly young men from the Old Christians Rugby Club, friends, family, and crew, eager for a weekend match in Chile. What was meant to be a routine flight transformed in a matter of hours into one of history's most astonishing stories of endurance, willpower, and humanity, confronted by the most extreme odds. As the plane approached the border between Argentina and Chile, the weather deteriorated. Dense cloud cover obscured the dangerous terrain below, the snow-laden peaks of the Andes Mountains rising sharply through the storm. A navigational miscalculation tragically placed the aircraft off course. Trusting that they had safely crossed the mountains, the pilots abruptly began descending, only to collide with an unseen mountain ridge. The fuselage sheared off wings and tail against the unforgiving slopes before skidding to a halt more than 12,000 feet above sea level. Death was immediate for some. For others, the nightmare was just beginning. In those chaotic first moments, 29 passengers emerged alive, wounded and disoriented, amidst the snowy desolation. Many bore broken limbs, shattered skulls, and punctured lungs. The temperatures plunged far below freezing, and the wind bit through clothing designed for a day in the city, not survival at high altitude. The thin air made each breath a struggle. The survivors' initial resourcefulness was remarkable. With the airplane wreckage as their only shelter, they organized themselves for warmth and protection against the elements, blocking holes in the fuselage with luggage and debris. The frigid landscape offered no edible plants and no trace of animal life, not even insects. What little food there was, chocolate bars, wine, jam, the odd tin of mussels, was strictly rationed. The group's hope rested on immediate rescue. News of a plane lost in the Andes brought international attention, and at night the survivors watched for search planes. They wrote SOS in the snow with lipstick, signaled with mirrors, used seat padding as insulation, and melted snow on metal sheets for drinking water. Still, as days stretched into weeks, hope began to dwindle. Eventually, a portable radio crackling through the cold silence delivered devastating news. The search had been called off. They realized in a shattering moment that no help was coming. They were truly alone. As hunger gnawed at their insides, physical strength began to deteriorate, and the will to survive came under siege. Among the group were men like Fernando Parrado, rendered unconscious for days after the crash before awakening to painful awareness. Roberto Canessa, a medical student whose skills were put to desperate use. And Marcelo Perez, their determined team captain. Decisions critical to their survival, how to share food, manage injuries, and keep up morale, became points of painstaking group discussion. The survivors' Catholic faith became both comfort and torment when faced with the most unthinkable choice: survival by eating the flesh of those who had perished. After exhausting everything else, and with days between meals stretching out endlessly, they made a collective decision, agonizing and against their deepest beliefs, to use the bodies of their friends as sustenance. Snow preserved the remains, and with solemnity and prayer they partook. Many saw this act as a paradox, an ultimate betrayal of their human taboos, but also a profound affirmation of life, made with consent, honor, and remembrance for the dead. It was this unyielding drive to survive, woven with guilt and gratitude for those who had died, that allowed them to endure as the miserable weeks wore on. On the 17th day, hope was again battered by tragedy. An avalanche thundered down upon the wreckage at night, entombing those inside under tons of snow. 8 more lives were lost in an instant, and the remaining survivors clawed through darkness and ice to exhume themselves, now even fewer in number. Death was a constant presence, its shadow falling both as physical peril and psychological torment. Outside, the Andes were a blank, endless world of ice and sky, but inside the fuselage, the struggle became clockwork. They fashioned sunglasses from seat covers and plastic to stave off snow blindness, repaired clothing with wire and insulation, and held onto every scrap of warmth and humanity, retelling stories, praying, and supporting each other's resolve. While some succumbed to despair or illness, others rallied together behind new plans for escape. Meteorological clues and careful observation began to convince the group that their only hope lay in crossing the mountains themselves to find help. After weeks of preparation, 3 young men, Fernando Parrado, Roberto Canessa, and Antonio Vizintin, set out westward, following the sun. Their trek, made with no proper gear and only the barest rations, was virtually suicidal. Each night, they dug shallow holes in the snow and huddled together for warmth, their feet wrapped in torn aircraft insulation for boots. After days of excruciating effort, Vizintin was sent back to spare provisions, and Parrado and Canessa pressed on. They clambered across impossible ridges and through snowfields, finally reaching foothills and, eventually, green valleys where the first signs of civilization emerged. On the 10th day, they encountered Sergio Catalan, a Chilean shepherd. Skeptical at first, Catalan was stunned by the gaunt, sun-blackened men before him and quickly went for help. Back at the crash site, the remaining survivors, now only 14, waited on the edge of hope and collapse. Contact was made by radio, and within days, search and rescue helicopters arrived to pluck the last of the living from the mountain. In the end, only 16 survived, having endured 72 days above the snowline. Their extraordinary ordeal captivated the world and forced an international reckoning with what people can do in the name of survival. For the survivors, reunion with their families was a complex homecoming, marked by trauma, relief, and the burden of explaining the choices they had made. Many were reluctant to speak at first. As the truth emerged, public reaction ran the spectrum from disgust to awe. But gradually, the acts of the survivors came to be seen as a testament to the determination and dignity of the human spirit. Several survivors would go on to share their experience in books, interviews, and films. The most notable written account, Alive, by Piers Paul Read, relied on intimate interviews and offered an unflinching examination. The story reached new audiences through movies, including Alive, starring Ethan Hawke, and the award-winning Spanish-language film Society of the Snow, praised for its realism and empathy. At the core of the Andes tragedy are its people, those who led, who comforted, and who carried on. Fernando Parrado, whose physical strength and clear-headedness drove the critical escape, later became a motivational speaker, sharing his lessons of perseverance. Roberto Canessa, whose medical knowledge and courage saved lives on the mountain, became a prominent cardiologist and advocate. Others, like Carlos Paez, renowned for his optimism, and team captain Marcelo Perez, remembered for his early leadership, exemplified the spirit of unity and sacrifice that steered the group through unfathomable hardship. The miracle of the Andes remains a mirror to the extremes of human experience. It asks difficult questions about morality, faith, and the boundaries of will, but it also reveals the profound power of community, friendship, and survival against all odds. Decades later, it is not merely the horror, but the resilience and profound humanity of the survivors that endures in collective memory.